Hello Reconnect Festival, I hope you're hearing me well. So, first of all, thank you to Reconnect Festival and Espace Croisé for inviting me for this talk. And after this 20 minutes talk, well, I'll introduce a bit of my research project of this year. We will do a live performance with Julien, Poidevin, a sound artist. So thank you for all being here. I hope there will be no technical issue. It's my first time doing Instagram Live, so there you are. So for a quick presentation, my name is Claire Williams and I'm an artist based in Brussels. Currently I'm doing a post-diploma at Le Fresnois, and as an artist my main mediums used in my installations range from sounds, electronics and crafts. Just for a small background before I start going inside the subject we're going to talk about today, I wanted to give you a small introduction to what is my artwork, so you can also go and visit my website if you want to see pictures. So since I have been creating installations, I have used them to investigate our electromagnetic spaces. So in this sense, maybe we can all try and for a moment and try and feel what that space is, and think of all these energies and waves and oscillations that are crossing our spaces and bodies right now at this moment. So we have to imagine this whole electromagnetic world is a place where things are getting more and more denser as our telecommunications are growing more and more, and we have more and more, of course, electronic circuits and things of this kind that's adding to that. Also, we can also think of it, well, this is the way I think of it, in a sort of ghostly world in which we live, that is inside our realities, and this is also a kind of space in which we used to communicate each time. For example, we will use our mobile phone or text a message. So we have satellite sending scientific data, GPS coordinates, or we also have all these human voices dangling in the midair, music, radio broadcasted, and along to that in the spectrum there are a lot of different frequencies, for example microwave, X-rays, infrared, radio waves, and adding to that, weaving into that, a lot of natural electromagnetic fields that are coming not from artificial but natural origins. There are some that are terrestrial and extraterrestrial activity. So for example, we have the activity of lightning storms, auroras, the sun, or cosmic waves coming from outer space, where, for instance, in 1 second you have like 100 cosmic waves going through your bodies right now, every second. So when I started making art installations, I constructed and crafted my own instruments and devices and interfaces, which I used to sense or materialize part of this invisible world. I started, for example, weaving sculptural antennas in spaces. The woven antennas were shaped in a way to sense natural electromagnetic waves called VLF. Called VLF, and natural EMF activity taking place in our ionosphere, where we can, for example, with appropriate amplifier and antenna, we can, for example, hear lightning storms at the other part of the planet. Another project consisted in knitting antennas to make them wearable. So, for example, you could walk around and sense the electromagnetic activity as our bodies are moving in the streets. So these antennas and electronics pick up our household electronic circuits, and they emit EMF activity. these are a few examples of how I got into creating instruments to try and give the spectator an experience or sense of what we live in this intangible part of our reality. So for now I'm gonna, so this is a small introduction on my previous artwork, and now I'm gonna narrow it down to the subject I'm working on this year, and there's an upcoming installation I'm doing which will be finished in September in my post-diplôme Le Fresnois, and it's one of the first installations that's coming out of this research. So I've been documenting for some time archives of different artists of the 19th century, and that were crafted by scientific minds, chemists, physicians, engineers, inventors, mediums, doctors, and theosophists. And they were conceived to explore and understand what we referred to at those times as the ether. So ether was this matter that incarnates emptiness, in which fluids would be exchanged between bodies and cosmos. Around 1900, physicists thought as much as 20 years ago that ether existed, but as their first vision of ether was mechanical, now the new one was electromagnetic. At the beginning of the 19th century was marked by also a lot of technological achievements. For example, the first telecommunication system devices who appeared, such as the electrical telegraph, or for the first time, we have to imagine you could communicate with somebody that wasn't physically present. And this was crossing, of course, all sorts of barriers of space and time. So we can imagine that if you're living in that time, how it can be something very daunting and very uncanny for people that suddenly you could just communicate with these disembodied presences all across the world. So just as uncanny these communication channels were accessible, it also opened up a new possibility to communicate with one another using intangible forces. For example, exchanging thoughts through brainwaves was a very active research at that time, or communicating with the world of the dead, or also develop other type of psychic abilities such as the action of mind on matter. People had a conscience that this whole new space in which they deployed a lot of their imagination was there, and they were living in it, and they were trying to understand how to use it and try to speculate how the future would look like, and really thought that the future would be totally wireless. So you had these posters where, for example, you see women brushing out cables and saying, this is so old, the future is just going to be telepathical and just invisible. So it's interesting also to think of how now we're still putting our set for the live concert after with so many cables still. So at that time, uprising spirit circles in the Victorian period, where we had a lot of female mediums who would demonstrate these forces. So they... sorry. I lost my... So where female mediums would demonstrate these forces, or their body would actually serve as an interface between the living and the dead, and they would actually, through their bodies, channel out these mystical powers from the ether and use it to levitate objects or electrify people, disrupt power lines, etc. All these things that you've probably seen in films or movies, or maybe you even went to a medium, or you go there to ask questions for your life. So all these things were happening also at the same time. All these technologies, these wireless technologies, were appearing. So the mid-19th was a period with a tremendous technological advancements in all these inventions that were appearing. So we had, for example, the battery by Volta, or the telephone that was patented by Bell. The first transatlantic cables were installed. The phonograph by Edison also, where suddenly you have to imagine that people would hear a voice float coming out of a machine, which was very, very uncanny, and caused a lot of trauma and a sense of deep mystery into what these machines, what this electricity was doing. And of course, we have at very late 19th century and at right at the beginning of the 20th century, the rise of radio telecommunications. So the first ones were at that time. So what is also interesting when you're digging into these archives is that you find that there are very many crossroads where the same scientific people behind these inventions I just cited counted among the adherents of the spiritualist movements. And they even form a society, the Society for Psychical Research. And they use these same machines or methods to investigate mediums' bodies in sciences, or they would use electric imagery to prove spiritual presence, for example. They would also try and understand or prove the action of mind on matter, imprint the existence of vital fluids, for example, or energies coming from our own bodies, as today we know in these esoteric researches is called auras. So there has been many researchers such as Jeffrey Scott, Richard Noax, Philippe Baudouin, who have also done very interesting research and shown also how some of these same scientists who had most of them lost a loving one in their life also conducted occult experiments prior to these inventions. So in the same time, Edison was working on the phonograph to mechanicalize sound. The necrophone was a mysterious device that was expected to communicate with the dead. Bell was previously using, for example, human ears mixed with mechanics to try and make speech visible with his ear phonotograph. And he was also speculating on the possibilities of thought transference by electricity. There's also Oliver Lodge, who is also known in the scientific world as a pioneer of radio and wireless telegraphy. And he used electricity as both a practical and theoretical tool in his investigations of the Italian medium, very famous medium, Sapia Palladino. And he extrapolated a lot of his findings into the electromagnetic radiation to assert the presence of the universal ether enveloping both natural and occult worlds. There's another interesting personnage who is called Dr. Hippolyte Baraduc and Louis Dargues, so two French, and they carried on quite interesting things. So they invented the portative radiograph, where they were exploring thought photography. So there were many people actually exploring this kind of process. And for example, their technique was they would try and imprint a telepathic image of a coin onto sensitive plates. So a lot of sensitive plates and all this chemistry related to photography was also very, very much used to try and prove or understand and as a sensitive space where things could be revealed. So electricity was also there was also Hippolyte Baraduc, who also did other experiments, and he also invented this kind of, well, not kind of, but what he called biometer, which is a kind of galvanometer. So it's today we can refer it to our modern multimeter. This is how you measure electricity. And he made this biometer in the way it would measure human vibrations with a needle that would indicate the levels of energy. Electricity was seen as a theoretical concept and a practical tool used in spirit science investigations. Scientific instruments were used for their objectivity to prove unexplained phenomena. They would try to reveal the invisible, and for example, they would say, the camera lens is something very neutral, and that would also lead to all the spirit photography, saying, this camera who took it, so nobody could enter and make something false. The question of, for example, William Crookes, who is another member of the Society for psychic research. He was asking if these machines, for example, could be hypnotized or fascinated in the way men are. So it's also understanding how this objectivity of machines were also very much questions at the time. So to finish a bit, what is interesting is that spiritualism didn't turn away from technology, but really embraced machine culture. If today you still look at ghost hunters and people like that, you will still see they are always using electronic circuits as a way where the spiritual world could manifest itself. They embraced machine culture. And the investigators who are using these instruments to measure, for example, bodies during sciences, many of these methods and technologies were actually also used a lot on female bodies, the mediums, female bodies, since a lot of mediums were females at the time. And this female body was playing the role of a kind of mysterious machines. And for example, you would have people sitting in a circle with all their hands holding in a circle, and they were mimicking electronic circuits to channel up energy. The spiritist movement modeled itself a lot on these electronic circuits, and they tried to, for example, recreate antennas with their bodies and imitating batteries by linking to each other. They would use ground and positive notions to make this kind of human circuitry with the medium in the middle who would be the main receptor transmitter. It also modeled itself a lot on the telegraph, ability to receive these remote messages. We can also link this to the typewriter, for example, being a machine that also was only operated by women, or how women became part of the machinery when we see the first ENIAC computers, for example, as they were calculating algorithms or punching binary holes. So there's also a whole maybe chapter interesting about these links to female bodies and machines. So, surprising as it may seem, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, there was quite a harmonious coexistence of the empirical and supernatural. Scientific methods were very different then in comparison to today's objective ideology of science. We can also think that computers were starting to replace scientific analytic imagery today, that probably makes it a bit more distant for us or less questionable in the sense of which kind of reality it puts. Our modern ether is surely still of a lot of unknown matter, and astrophysics, for example, are looking in the cosmos for all these exotic particles or black matter or black energy. The advent of quantum physics, of course, is certainly opening a whole new territory to be explored, and we will probably radically change also our concept of space and time in the future. So maybe the question to finish this talk is what I'm also thinking about a lot now, is maybe how can we think we will reinvent our communication technologies or circuits in the future? So how can these examples, for example, of media archaeology help us imagine maybe circuits that could be crafted from non-Western, non-patriarchal cultures, or electronics and circuits machines who would defy objective science and add maybe parallel possibilities of how we think our world. So these are questions that I'm quite interested in, also trying to think about them from today's perspective. So thank you for listening. I hope it was okay, not too fast. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for being here. You can, of course, send me a message if you have any questions or want also some sources. There's a lot, so I couldn't cite everybody. So in September, there will be an installation that will be an outcome of this research, and more is planned also in the future. So now I'm going to ask you to get your headphones, which is quite important because we're going to switch and do this show. and it's a binaural, spatialized and binaural, so it's really better if you have your headphones and to get a better quality of the sound. So the live performance is with Julien Poidevin, who's also a sound artist, and we will take you now for a journey from the Earth to the cosmos of our electromagnetic space using radio scanners, EMF detectors. We're going to stream live from radio telescopes of our solar activity, VLF in our ionosphere, and this will be a sort of travel where you can maybe hear a small portion of this electromagnetic activity. So I hope you enjoy, and thank you so much for participating. Many thanks again to my host, Espace Croisé and Reconnect, and thank you. Bye-bye. Putting the image. I'll take this out. Glisse.
Non, tu l'enlèves, tu cliques, t'enlèves là. Ça, tu glisses, tu coupes le son. Okay.
Thank you very much
Thanks.
for listening and have a beautiful evening.